Okay, good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time you are watching. We're going to do a Year 7 lesson today on the spread of Islam in the 8th century. And now, before we do that, I just wanted to say really briefly that I'm really devastated to not be able to be with you. I'm absolutely fine. I've just got a slight cough, which means I'm not able to be in school at the moment. But I am really missing seeing you and teaching you. And hopefully we'll be able to do some of our lessons in this way over the next days and weeks. So today, as I said, our lesson is how did Islam spread so far by the 8th century? If we can get that title down somewhere, get a pen and paper if you're at home, or use your books if you're in school. And we've got some of our keywords there that we're going to be looking back at the end of the lesson. So we've got Mecca, Muhammad, Caliph, convert, jizya, persecuted. So some of those words you'll have heard before, especially in our first lesson on the Islamic Empire, and some of them you will have never heard before. And the main question is that we're going to be looking at, as well as how did Islam spread so far, is why. What was the main reason why it spread? So, to start off with, then I want you to do your space retrieval. So you've got 4 mind maps to complete. I'm going to ask that you pause the video in a moment. So I want you to do a mind map on Islam, thinking back to our first lesson. Think about the basics of what you know about Islam and Muslims. And then I want you to do something about this city of Mecca that we looked at. Don't worry if you've forgotten things. It was a long time ago now, about a week and a half since our last lesson. So don't panic, but try and get anything that you remember about it. Number 3, if you can do the Black Death. Anything you remember about that, especially important at this time when people are thinking about our health and public health, to think back to a time that was much, much worse than the coronavirus, the Black Death. And then finally, Sutton Hoo, right back at the start of Year 7, what can we remember about Sutton Hoo? So pause the video and do those 4 mind maps for me now. Okay, let's go over some answers then. So for Islam, and you might have got things different to this, that's absolutely fine. But if you've not got any of these, please add them to your mind maps now. Islam, the founder, the leader, is the Prophet Muhammad. You could also mention that their place of worship for Muslims is mosques, that their holy book is the Quran, and that their name for God, the God that they worship, is Allah. For the city of Mecca, we looked at the fact it was the city that Muhammad was born. We also talked about it being a place of pilgrimage. We talked about this idea of people going over, travelling from all around the world to go and visit it as like a special holy place. We saw the black box, which is in the centre of Mecca, where people pray towards, and also this idea of prayer. So Muslims will make sure they're always facing Mecca. They always know what direction Mecca is so that they can pray towards it. Thirdly, Black Death. You could have anything to do with any of the symptoms, so buboes, vomiting blood, the fact it happened in 1347. You could talk about that there was, at that time there was no cure, and that also that it led to the peasant revolt. It was a long-term cause of the peasant revolt in 1381. And then finally, Sutton Hoo, if you remember, was a burial mound where there was an Anglo-Saxon king buried there. So any of these details, get those down. There was a ship down there, helmets, shield, and they think it was the burial ground of King Raedwald, although we're not sure for definite. Okay, so as a little recap from last lesson, so we know where we stand. So these 2 maps show us that the Roman Empire, here in the top left, that dominated Europe for about 1,000 years, from the 5th century BC all the way through to the 5th century AD. And you'll have learned about the Roman Empire probably in primary school, and you'll know little bits. However, we probably don't learn so much about the Islamic Empire, which controlled huge parts of the world, as shown in our bottom map. There we go. As shown by our bottom map with the places in green. And that was from the 7th century to the 16th century. So that's why it's important that we study it, because it's probably an area that we should know more about, and a period of history that we should know more about than we actually do. You'll also remember we looked at this text and we read it through together as a class, and then we did a quiz. And now I know it will seem like a long time ago since we did this, but we're going to have a recap to try and get us back into that period of time and that way of thinking. So I want you to have a look at these questions that are on the board. Have a look at these questions on the board, and I want you to answer them in your books. Now, make sure you cannot see the answers you gave previously. make sure they are new, that it's a fresh page in your book, and have a go. Do not worry if you find this hard, because it was a long time ago, so just do your very, very best. Okay, pause the video now, have a go, and we'll go through the answers in a moment. Okay, let's go through some answers then. So, what year was Muhammad born? 570 AD. Number 2, what was a caravan? It was a row of camels, so a line of camels that would travel across the desert. They would often carry both people and goods to trade, products to trade. An empire mentioned in the text that we looked at before was the Roman, the Byzantine, or the Sasanian Empire. We're going to look at those last two in today's lesson. The tribe camped across the city was the Bedouin tribe. A product being traded was slaves, cloth, perfume, silk. A pilgrim is someone on a religious journey. The Kaaba is a black box seen as sacred, and that's where people pray towards. Okay. How many people lived in Mecca at that time? I'll be very impressed if anyone remembered that. It was 20,000 people. The Quraysh tribe were the leaders in Mecca. They were the tribe in charge. And finally, Amina was Muhammad's mother. So add up your scores. If you need to pause it to get these down, please do. Add up your scores. I'll be very, very impressed if anyone got more than 5, because it was a long time since we studied this. When you're ready, we will move on. So Mecca is still important today. It's a place of pilgrimage. When we talk about the black box, this is what it looks like today. And you have millions of people who travel to Mecca, which is in modern-day Saudi Arabia, because it is the city of Muhammad's birth. So here you've got Manchester United footballer Paul Pogba, one of the most famous and expensive footballers in the world. He is a Muslim, so he believes he needs to make this pilgrimage, this religious journey to Mecca, at least once in his life, because it's so important. It's such an important place to Muslims. So, the beginnings of Islam. As we've looked at, Muhammad, he is born in 570, and Muslims believe that Muhammad was chosen by God to be his messenger in the year 610. And as I'm talking, you might want to get some of these notes down in your book. In the years that followed, it is believed that he received more messages from God. After around 5 years of listening and receiving these messages, Muslims believe that Muhammad began to preach these messages to other people. Now, this was quite controversial because there were lots of people who followed other religions at that time in Arabia, in this part of the world where Muhammad is born. There are loads of different religions going on. And remember, that part of Mecca was already somewhere that people used to come to pray to their different gods. So it's quite controversial that Muhammad believed that he was being spoken to directly by God, and he had a new religion, some new ideas for them to follow. He faced a lot of resistance, as we said, but Muhammad and his people found safety in the town of Medina, and there was war between the people of Mecca and Medina, because the people of Mecca were so angry that Muhammad was preaching this new religion. Muslims also came into conflict with the other Arabic tribes, but eventually peace was made. Okay, remember, anything that you think will be helpful for you in remembering this, we can get that down. If you need to pause the video, please do. But Muhammad dies in 630 AD. Okay, and after his death, relatives and others became caliphs. This is one of our key words, so really important that we get this down and understand it. A caliph was the name of the leader of Islam, somebody who took over and succeeded Muhammad, and they were seen as the leaders of the Muslims, and this caused decades of conflict. But despite the fact that there was some arguing over who was in charge of the Muslims and who was the true caliph, Islam began to rapidly spread, and we're going to look at some of the reasons for that. So if you are in class, around the room there are 14 different causes of the spread of Islam, because there were loads of different reasons that Islam went from a little religion where one man believes that God is speaking to him, Muhammad, to all of a sudden becoming the fastest growing religion in the world. Islam is now the fastest growing religion in the world, and it is the second largest religion in the world in terms of countries that have it as an official religion. So how did we get from it being tiny to it being so massive, and Islam being such an important religion for millions of people around the world? So if you're in the class, look around at these different causes. I want you to pass them around. You've only got 2 minutes on each cause. So the teacher, the member of staff in the room will be supporting you with that and making sure you know when to pass on. When you get each card, In your book, I want you to write down the number of the one you've got, and I want you to try and summarise it in just a few words, literally one sentence, maybe 5 words maximum if you can do it. Try and summarise the idea that is on there. If you are doing this in class, you can now pause it and you can fast forward, because for those people who are not in class and who are learning at home, I'm going to go over those causes that are on the cards. Okay, for those in class, good luck. Okay, let's look at these causes. I'm going to talk through what I want you to do. If you are studying alone, if you're doing remote learning, then I want you to be getting down, just as the people in class are, I want you to be getting down in a few words what each of these causes are. So feel free to pause it at any point. So I'm going to talk through the 14 main causes of Islam going from this tiny religion to taking over and controlling huge parts of the world. So, number 1, the Sasanian and Byzantine Empire were at war with each other. At the end of their war, both empires were weak. This allowed the Islamic Empire to take over. Number 2, the Arab people had never attacked the Sasanian and Byzantine empires before, so they didn't think they were a threat. They had always traded with them peacefully, and so they were taken by surprise. Number 3, Muslims believed that Allah wanted them to spread Islam to other people. Because they believed God was on their side, they fought with great courage. And that might remind you of things like the Battle of Hastings. That might remind you of when we talk about William having the papal banner and having the support of the Pope. His people believed, his army believed they had God on their side, so they fought with confidence. They weren't scared of dying, so they had no doubt that they were going to win. And as a result, they fought with great courage. So maybe there's a little link there. They thought that God was on their side and they couldn't lose. Number 4, when Muslims took over an area of land, they did not force Christians and Jews to convert to Islam. Convert means to change from one religion to another, and it's one of our key words. So instead of asking them to convert and forcing them, they could pay a special tax called jizya, and that's another one of our key words. So maybe make a note of that, because I'm going to ask you to do something with these key words at the end. A special tax known as jizya, paid for people who were Christians or Jews who didn't convert to being Muslim. Number 5, the Byzantine and Sasanian empires were unpopular because they charged high taxes. When the Muslims came in, they were treated as liberators. Liberators mean people who set others free. And in Syria, in certain places in Syria, there were reports of Christians and Jews begging the Muslims to stay because they were fair rulers. Even though the Byzantine Empire were a Christian group, the Christians in that area were desperate for the Muslims to control them because they thought they were fairer. And maybe number 6 links into that. Although the Byzantine Empire was Christian, they only allowed certain types of Christianity, and they persecuted, which means treated poorly because of people's beliefs, Jewish people, whereas the Muslims were more tolerant. We've said that they allowed people to pay jizya instead of converting. Number 7, the Muslim armies invaded wealthy places, so the Muslims could become very rich. This motivated the Muslims to conquer more places. So they wanted to win, the Muslim armies wanted to be successful. They were motivated because they knew that if they won and they took over areas, they could become very, very rich. Number 8, the Sasanian and Byzantine armies had very heavy armour. Can't be doing with that spelling mistake, so we'll get that changed. Armies had very heavy armour and moved slowly, whereas the Muslim army moved quickly and had skilled cavalry, soldiers on horses. Some people say as well that because the Muslim armies had been used to growing up in the desert, that they were particularly strong, hard people. They were used to living in tough conditions, used to living in the desert. So fighting against another army is going to be a doddle. It's going to be easy. Okay, last 2 pages of causes. Make sure we're pausing to get these down. 9, the Muslim army had amazing weapons like ballistae. Ballista, it was like a giant sling for throwing large stones. Okay, and the Greeks and Romans also had these as well, and they could throw boulders that could break down city walls. And these amazing weapons. Number 10, the Muslims conquered the Berber people in North Africa, and some Berber people became dedicated Muslims and helped the Muslims conquer Spain by 720 AD. So some of the people that they took over, they then helped them to spread it to other places because they believed in the Muslim message. 11, the Muslims also built up their sea power, So they started to use boats more, which meant they could travel further distances. And that helped them to conquer North Africa. That helped them to take over places like Egypt and Tunisia, which are still Muslim countries to this day. Last three then. 12. The Arab tribes had previously fought against each other, but now they were all Muslims. They were united. This made them strong in battle. So the Arab tribes are known for fighting with each other before Muhammad comes along and unites everybody as Muslim. And now they're strong and united together. 13. Muslims did not force people to convert to Islam, so areas often became Muslim slowly. Because people had more choice in their religion, Islam lasted longer than if they were forced. So that's a tricky one to think of. But you might think they should just come in and force everybody to become Muslim, and then that will help Islam to spread more. But actually what they found was that because they didn't force it on people, those ideas stuck. And I think that's probably a good idea. It's probably true that if you wanted somebody to actually stick with an idea, you have to make them want it for themselves. You can't just force it on somebody. If I said to you and stood over you while you're doing your work and said, right, you need to do all this, you need to write that, it might work for 30 minutes or it might work for a couple of lessons, but over time it's not going to work. It's going to wear off. Instead, if you realise that you want to do your education for yourself, just like the people were realising they actually wanted to have Islam as their religion for themselves, then actually you're going to be more motivated and it's going to stay with you for longer. So that might seem like an odd one, but because they didn't force it on people and they gave people the choice, they actually ended up staying Muslim for longer. Finally, flip back to that. Finally, Muslim armies were not always peaceful. We must make that clear. And if an area revolted, one of our keywords from the Peasants' Revolt, fought against who's in charge, the Muslim armies would crush them. They had a spectacular army, and they would show their strength to scare people, stop them from rebelling in future. Okay, this is where I want you to do a piece of work for me. So in your books, so we should be welcoming back the people who are in class at this point. So have a go at this question for me. How was Islam able to spread so far by the 8th century? It's our key big question for the lesson. Use that sentence starter to help you. I think the main reason Islam was able to spread so far by the 8th century was use one of those 14 cards, but explain it. Okay? And in a moment, once you've done that, it should only take you about 4 or 5 minutes to write a little mini paragraph for us. And your teacher your class teacher, or yourself if you're at home, I would like you to pause it and time yourself for that. You might want to use this because you're going to be marking it in a moment. So start off by mirroring the question. If it says, I think the main reason Islam was able to spread so far by the 8th century, use the words from the question to start. You've got your sentence starter, so that should be easy. Number 2, have you given evidence? Have you got stuff from the cards or from that list of 14? Make sure your evidence is really specific, really clear. 3, have you explained it? Have you said, this helped Islam to spread because? Don't just give the evidence. You've got to explain it. Use because or this meant that and explain all of the consequences. And then finally, at the end, have you linked things back to the question? Have you said something like, therefore, this helped Islam to spread so quickly? Okay, I will leave you now for 4 or 5 minutes. So pause the video and have a go at that, and we'll come back right at the end. Okay. Hopefully, I've just flipped back to that. Hopefully now you've written your answer and you can now use the peel marking checklist. So ideally with green pens or with a different coloured pen, just go over either your answer or your partner's and just tick it to see if they've done those 4 things. Everybody should have mirrored it because you've got a sentence starter up there for you. So everybody should have done that bit. But try to see if they have done all 4 of those things. If they have, they're going to end up with 4 ticks. If not, they might need to add little bits to it. Finally, you can do this in a number of ways. If you're in class, then I would like you to write down the 6 keywords, and I want you to use them in a sentence. I want you to use them in 6 separate sentences. You might want to link some of them together, but explain what they are and why they are relevant to today's lesson. For those people at home, you can do that, or what might be helpful, especially if you're in a house with your family, maybe to have a conversation with somebody in your family and explain what you've learned using those key words. Okay, so to make sure that you've got those 6 words in front of you to go, right, I'm going to tell you and explain to my family how Islam spread really quickly, and I'm going to make sure that I've hit these 6 words as I do so. Okay, look forward to seeing you again soon. We will keep putting videos up on this YouTube channel, so make sure that you are working hard. You are a fantastic class, a fantastic year group, but we can't lose any momentum. We need to make sure that we're working really, really hard. So look forward to seeing you soon, and